Welcome back. It's the final weekend for political parties to campaign for votes in the May 29 general elections. Now, political parties are holding their rallies today, and these entail thank you speeches, political swaying, as well, of course, as music concerts. We've already seen them dancing as they speak to some of our reporters this morning. And well, the road to the 29 May general elections has been like no other. With the IEC in court for various reasons, there's been a spike in the number of political parties being registered, independent candidates running as well, and analysts saying there could be more surprises after the elections. We continue to get some analysis with Professor Dirk Kotze and Yolokazi Mfuto in studio with us. They are the friends of the anchor this morning. Let's continue. You know, just an hour ago, Prof, you made a really interesting point about the political and economic offering of a party such as the MK party versus its social offering. And of course, on a day like this, when we look at the numbers that are filling the stadiums, you can't help but notice, you know, the similarities in the people that are going to be in that stadium. One of the young people that we spoke to at that stadium there with our reporter saying, well, here in KZN, it's clear that the MK party is making inroads. Talk about that social offering. Do you believe as well, as we've heard from some analysts, that this is a party that is stimulating tribalism in the country?
Well, if we look at the election manifesto, they say it very explicitly, that they want to promote the position of traditional leaders. They want to formalize it, give more official recognition for them. They even talk about a type of a fourth layer of government for traditional leaders. Now, they are already included in some of the local authorities, local governments. But I think for them that's not enough. So in that direction, they certainly are in direct competition with the IFP, because that, as we know, is a very important component of the IFP's political program also, is to develop a very strong leaders connection, relationship with the traditional leaders of, first of all, KwaZulu-Natal. The Zulu King is a very good example of that, but also beyond that, in Mpumalanga and other places. So that's the one component, but I want to take it slightly further. You know, some of the comments that President Zuma made, and that's actually included in the election manifesto, is, for example, young women who must be sent to Robben Island, you know, about a 1-year compulsory military service.
For young men?
Yes, the fact that children are not supposed to have any legal rights in relationship to their parents. You know. Then it goes into the more legal component that it says that the current constitution is not, it's what they call actually a strategic defeat, and that they have to dissolve the constitution as it is. They want to go into a parliamentary system, which from a constitutional human rights point of view is definitely some steps back or in a completely different direction. So these are aspects which I think many people will say, well, we can support their economic plan, but these issues are slightly problematic for us. But I think what is interesting about the MK party is that I don't get the impression that they actually focus on the youth. You know, that they are more focused on the persons in their 40s, 50s, and even older. So the fact that we all know that the majority of the electorate, or registered voters at least, are 35 and younger. So in a sense, they actually exclude themselves from that competition for that component. And I think this makes it possible for them to have a more, let's say, traditionalist social policy, while when it comes to economic matters, they put themselves on the left. You know, even left of the ANC, close to the EFF, because they feel that this is where the traditional ANC constituency actually are located. So in that sense, they are in direct competition with the EFF also. But when it comes to the generational aspects of it, they are completely different.
Is that perhaps not where the opportunity then lies for post-29 May coalition talks, right? Where we say, well, if we consolidate the votes that they get for coalition agreements, that's where the EFF then steps in. I mean, I made this note just before we came out of the break about you've got the MK party, the ANC, the EFF, and certainly the Patriotic Alliance holding these rallies today in that last effort to sway the voter. And one thing that they all have in common is that they all sit outside of the multi-party charter. And And I want to bring this to you, Yolokazi, certainly the Patriotic Alliance being very open about how adversarial its relationship is with the Democratic Alliance, particularly in the Western Cape. Are we looking at 4 parties that possibly could co-align successfully, peacefully and strategically, and certainly outweigh the work of the multi-party charter, if at all, or the numbers thereof? Yeah,
well, definitely. The multi-charter party, currently we don't see their momentum in the electioneering. We have not seen them campaigning together, even in some of the engagement that they've had. Even the leader itself, Steenhuisen, he's not necessarily now as confident as he was before about the multi-charter. Probably there's like some crisis in the house. We don't know about that. But secondly, when you look into the different parties that are outside the multi-charter, we look at the EFF, the ANC, the MK and the Patriotic Alliance, there could be a level of coalition, even though no party has come out and say, we are going to ensure that we have a coalition with this particular party, because they're all thinking that they're going to win outright majority for some odd reason, right? They are not necessarily the EFF aligning itself with the ANC. We've seen previously them voting with the DA. We've seen them voting with Action SA. So now we don't know, actually. The people who are going to vote for these parties do not know what will happen lest we have a coalition party. But with the multi-charter, they've had engagements on who then gets to be president. Let's say you go for a coalition, who gets to be deputy president, even though that discussion was had behind closed doors, and then it leaked in interviews and ad. So there might be the coalition with the parties outside of the multi-charter party, but the multi-charter itself, currently they're not offering anything that seeks to give us an idea that they are willing to govern together in Parliament.
We had a discussion earlier about the gender-based violence, the Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide bill being signed into law. I mean, the President been busy signing all of these bills into law. And one of the questions I asked is the timing of it, right? And you can't ignore that we're getting close to elections. Signing bills into law says you're quite confident that you're still going to be in that seat to see over the execution of it post these elections. Let's talk about that, Prof. The sort of coalitions then that ensure that perhaps we don't see the dispensation that we're talking about and expecting to see on the 29th of May.
Well, to start with the multi-party charter, I don't think they had really the expectation that they can form government on their own. Because where they stand now, it is sort of somewhere in the 30%. So they will, if they come together, and if the ANC's position is in the low 40s or even below 40, it's only then when the multi-party charter will become relevant for coalition talks. And then at the same time, they will need extra parties. So as I said, the charter on its own won't be able to constitute a coalition, even in terms of its best possible conditions. So I think what they have done is that they have formed a pre-election alliance. I don't want to call it a coalition at all. In order to determine some of the aspects that they think should be negotiated, plus developing some element of trust amongst themselves. Now we know, for example, that DA and Action SA have problems with that. The understanding of the charter was always that they will campaign on their own. Because especially the smaller parties like Action SA is still scared, or has been scared, that they will be seen as being co-opted by the DA. So it becomes actually a DA plus type of situation. While the smaller parties, as Action SA, Freedom Front Plus, ASCDP and others, then they will basically disappear. So they have to protect their own identity. And I think this is the very delicate balance that they have to find, of how to combine their individual identities with that of cooperation. But when it comes to a coalition in general, I think it's going to be determined first and foremost by the election results. And especially what will be the votes for the ANC. If it's above 45%, there's one option. If there's between 40 and 45, there's another option. If it's below 40, then there's other options. The idea about coalitions is about who can negotiate the best.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately, because we have limited time in our constitution, 14 days, maybe 19 days maximum, it means that it's going to be about who can strike a deal within a very short space of time.
Yeah.
And compared to other countries, like I spoke to some persons from the Netherlands, they had the election in October last year. They are still busy negotiating at the moment about a government. So we want to avoid, in a sense, that, you know. But on the other hand, we have this bit of an extreme situation of where the time is actually very limited.
I want to go back to a very clear memory that I have, a vivid memory of the 2021 local government elections in a party like the Patriotic Alliance, for instance, Gayton McKenzie walking the floor at the Results Operations Centre, very, very confident, you know, making comments about how I'm the man that everybody wants to speak to now. And I wanted to bring that up because something about this election says there's going to be a list of kingmakers, but the question is who the top 3 kingmakers really are going to be.
Yes.
And I don't know if you're able to give me your, you know, throw the bones, if you will, about who you think the top 3 kingmakers will be. I'll start with you, Yolokazi, then bring it to you. In order of significance in the number of votes that they may garner, how much power they then have, the top 3 kingmakers going into this election.
Well, yes, the election is also about a game of numbers, definitely. So when we look into, let's say the ANC, as Prof says, gets 45 plus, right, but doesn't get the outright majority, then the kingmakers becomes who comes second and third, right? However, based on policy positions and also the power that they have in different provinces as well, it's going to play a role, right? So if the ANC gets 45 plus, then they get to make decisions, right? However, I do have a feeling that the EFF, because it attracts a lot of the youth voters, and according to the IEC, 80% of the current registered voters is about people from 19 to 25. So the youth vote that we've seen that the EFF is trying to attract could necessarily vote and ensure that the EFF comes second as an first opposition party. The DA might have be the third. So there would be the 3 kingmakers would be probably the ANC, because we cannot necessarily expect that the ANC is going to drop below 30. There's still an indication that the ANC might still try to really holding into power, however, not with the outright majority.
Okay.
Secondly, we look into the EFF, and then we look into maybe the DA. Particularly the provinces are going to provide much position for kingmakers. Gauteng, KZN, and possibly maybe Western Cape.
Okay, so what you've done, you've essentially told us what your what you think the top 3 parties are going to be. I'm keen to hear which are the top 3 parties that are going to decide who those top 3 are. Your kingmaker top 3, Prof.
Well, the ANC is the top party, irrespective which of the scenarios. Then, if as I said earlier on, if it's in the high 40s, then it will be small parties, the number 2 and 3. Not the DA, not the EFF, not MK, but the parties like, for example, Patriotic Alliance, like what we see here in Johannesburg, the type of coalition that they formed here, or earlier on in Ekurhuleni. If it is between 40 and 45, that's the tricky position. Because there must be bigger parties. And then what my colleague said is then becomes, I think, very relevant, is the ANC, the EFF and the DA. Both of them are not the real choices the ANC want. They are not their first choices. So they are going to be, and that's where the negotiations will come in. So I think the ANC will try to use as many of the small parties as possible, but not overload the coalition.
Yeah.
That they are not a coalition of 10 parties or so. So it will have to use at least one of the bigger parties. MK and the EFF, I differ a little bit. I think they are their last options. Because with the MK, it's a battle between brothers and sisters at the moment. So I don't think MK is in the pipeline as one of the main choices. The EFF and the ANC could not work together in the coalitions where they've been. And we know the national leadership of the ANC is not very much in favor of that type of coalition. So it creates the option of, for example, the idea of a grand coalition. That means the ANC, the DA, IFP, and then 1 or 2 maybe Action S or so, which is possibly the best option. But whether it will be possible, another option is obviously ANC-DA, which is not necessarily so attractive for the ANC, but is going to balance the political situation. So that is why this is so interesting, all these different options that exist.